to Sammy's Bookshelf. I'm Sammy, and today I am going to be showing you my favorite books that I read in 2021. Not necessarily books that came out in 2021, just the books that I read in 2021. Disclaimer, I am not going to be including books that I reread this year. I reread a lot of books this year, including some of my favorite books of all time. So it's really not fair if I include those books. So it's just books that I read for the first time. So I have 10 books that I have put in a ranking from my least favorite to my most favorite that I'm going to show you today. But I have also included some honorable mentions because I read so many great books and it hurt my heart to not at least mention these other books. So these are the books that I really loved, but they just didn't quite make it into my top 10. Defy the Night by Brigid Kemmerer. It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. The Lucky List by Rachael Lippincott. The Fountains of Silence by Ruta Sepatys. And finally, Rule of Wolves by Leigh Bardugo. So those were all my honorable mentions. Now let's get into my top 10 books of 2021. When I was constructing my top 10 books, I just couldn't not add this into the list. This book is so beautifully written, so impactful. Madeline Miller is such an amazing author. I'm not going to go on for too long about this book because I did just talk about it in length in my last video, in my December wrap-up. So if you want to hear my more in-depth thoughts, you should go watch that video because I don't want to just repeat myself. And also I do have a reading vlog where I read this book, which you can also check out. But in conclusion, this book deserves all the hype that it gets. It is absolutely beautiful. Next, we have Wolf by Wolf by Ryan Graudin. This was a book that when I first decided to pick this up, I would not have expected it for it to be in this top 10 list. But this book surprised me so much, it just blew me away. I absolutely loved it. I had heard good things about Wolf by Wolf, but I feel like it's not a super popular book. Not a lot of people have read it, but I was always just constantly intrigued by the premise of this book, of this alternate universe where the Nazis won World War II and this big motorcycle race. And so it sat on my shelf for many years until I decided to pick it up, and I'm so glad that I did because it was just so much fun. My favorite aspect of this book is definitely the big motorcycle race. I love a good race or competition in a book. It's just always so exciting and there's just never a dull moment, and it's so fun to see our main character interact with the other participants in the race. The characters in this book are so well done and so fleshed out. They were so interesting. I cared about them so much and I was so intrigued about what would happen to them in the preceding book. I also just love a supernatural element. I love that kind of taste of magic realism where we're in the real world but there's just a touch of magic. I love that, and this was really fun to read in this book. This book is so great. I feel like it's so underrated. Everybody should read this. It is so good. The Strange the Dreamer Duology by Laini Taylor. What I absolutely loved about this book was just how unique the plot was. It was nothing like I've ever read before, which I'm not surprised because I think the only other series maybe I would say that about is Laini Taylor's other series, Daughter of Smoke and Bone. The world was so interesting and it was so fascinating to learn about it. This book is kind of tough to get into when you first start reading it because there is so much world building and things you have to learn before you can really delve into the main plot. But it is so worth it. This book is so beautiful. It's gorgeously written. Laini Taylor is so great at coming up with these really beautiful metaphors. It was just so great. The second book was also just as good as the first book. In this book, we can just completely dive right into the plot because we've already set up everything about the world in the first book. And this world is also just so magical. This book feels like a fairy tale. If you are a fan of fairy tale retellings or just fairy tales in general and books that kind of just have that fairy tale atmosphere, this would be a book that you would love. Red, White and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. This is a book I've never got the chance to talk about on this channel because I read it right at the start of the year before any of this was a thing, and this book makes me so unbelievably happy. It is just so adorable. I'm so happy I decided to pick this book up after seeing it everywhere on TikTok. I saw a lot of critiques that this book is too happy and things end too perfectly, but that's what I love about this book. If you just want to escape a real world and dive into a world that is just like ours, but just a lot shinier and better, this is the book that you should read. And the romance is just so great. I love Alex and Henry with all of my being. They are just perfect for each other. Plus, it doesn't hurt that it has my favorite trope, enemies to lovers. And I love seeing everything from Alex's point of view. He's very witty and his inner monologue is always so entertaining. This was just great. Everyone in the world has already read this book, but if you haven't yet, you should read it. All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover. This is a complete 180 from Red, White and Royal Blue. Red, White and Royal Blue is like the epitome of happiness and this is like the epitome of sadness. But what I loved about this book was just how much of an impression it left on me. The way this book is constructed, where it goes back and forth between the past and present day, is so effective. I was so invested in this couple and whether they were going to make it or not and be happy together. This book also stands out for me because it's very different from what I usually read. It follows older characters with more mature themes. Honestly, if it wasn't a Colleen Hoover book, I probably would never have picked this up, but because it is Colleen Hoover and I already knew her and loved her, I did pick this book up and I'm so glad that I did. It is just so impactful and emotional. In fifth place comes the Scythe Trilogy by Neal Sushtermen. This trilogy is pure genius. Everything in this book is just so clever, how everything interweaves the themes and the questions about life and morality and science and technology and where it's going is so fascinating and so well written. Each book in this trilogy builds off each other so well and the world is so interesting. It's so fun to see the world expanding as we go into each book because it is just so interesting and so unique. Like, I would put this in as a dystopian / sci-fi book, and I feel like a lot of people when they hear dystopian, you know, a lot of the times in YA dystopian there is really only so many routes that we can go, but this dystopian just completely blows all those expectations out of the water. It is so completely unique. I love our two main characters in this book. They play off each other so well. I also loved a little tad of romance in this book. If you want to read this trilogy and you want to know if there's any romance, there's not a lot of romance, but as a romance lover, it was enough to keep me satisfied. I also love the big finale of this book. I was really satisfied with how everything wrapped up. The story as a whole was amazing. Arc of the whole story was great. These books were just so well constructed. In fourth place, we have A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. This was one of my most highly anticipated books of 2021. I was so excited to get my hands on this because I love the ACOTAR trilogy. It's one of my favorites, and it definitely did not disappoint. I love this world and these characters so much. Like, I feel like I could read a whole 1,000-page book on what each character has for breakfast, and I'd rate it 5 stars. I was worried when I initially went into this book that I wasn't going to love it as much as I loved the previous 3 books, just because this does follow the character of Nesta. It's a companion novel. I know I'm not the only one that multiple times throughout the ACOTAR trilogy I wanted to punch Nesta in the face because she was so annoying, so unlikable in the other books. And so I was really worried that I just wasn't going to vibe with Nesta as a protagonist, but I had nothing to worry about. Sarah J. Maas is really great at taking your opinions of a character and completely flipping them. Like, I hated Nesta in the previous books and now I love Nesta. I might like her even more as a protagonist than Feyre, and I just love her development as a character in this book. It was so well done. Sarah J. Maas is really great at character development, and you know, Nesta, she just had trauma. She just had trauma that she had to work through. Also love the theme of family in this book, and obviously this book is also told from Cassian's point of view. I knew I was going to love Cassian's point of view. Who doesn't love Cassian? He's great. I loved seeing him as a main character in this book and not just a side character. It was just so great. In third place place, we have Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. Chain of Iron was just the most frustrating book I have ever read in my whole entire life, and so out of those two, I definitely enjoyed Chain of Gold more, which is why it is on my top 10 books of the year. Very similar with the Akatar world, I am so invested in this group of characters. I think the reason why I am so invested in these characters is because they are all the children of all the characters from the Infernal Devices, so just that alone makes you care about them and connect with them. Plus, when you actually read this book, Cassandra Clare is just so great at writing an ensemble of characters, and you just fall head over heels with every single one of these characters, and I just want them all to be okay and to be happy. And I love how this book connects to the Dark Artificers. Before I read Chain of Gold, I had binged the Dark Artificers, and I love just seeing how things interconnect. And I'm also excited to see how the events of this book will interconnect with the Wicked Powers. I have been reading Secrets of Blackthorn Hall, so I am very intrigued to see how what happens in this trilogy will come into play in the Wicked Powers. I also love getting to see the characters from the Infernal Devices as side characters in this book. It's really interesting to see them, you know, a bit older, but this book was just so good. I pulled an all-nighter to read this, and I do not regret it. It was just so great. I love this book. It was phenomenal. Cannot wait for Chain of Thorns. I know I've said that 1,000 times in various videos, but I'm so invested. Can't wait to see where this trilogy will go in the future. In second place is another Cassandra Clare book because I just can't help myself, and that is Lord of Shadows. I binge read the Dark Artificers early in 2021 because I was super behind on the Shadowhunter Chronicles, so I binge read the Dark Artificers and it was great. Lord of Shadows was my favorite. I love how we just expand the plot in this book. Lady Midnight felt very self-contained. It almost felt like a standalone, but in this book we just rip everything open that we discovered in Lady Midnight and expand everything, and it is so much fun and so intriguing. This book made me laugh. It definitely made me cry. I love the Blackthorns and their big family and their dynamic and the relationships that we see in this book. There are so many romances in the Dark Artificers. If you are a romance lover, you will have such a great time. I loved every single romantic pairing in this book. Like, obviously we have our main romantic pairing, Emma and Julian, but we also see so many others, and it's just so great. One of my favorite things about this book was how it's written. Cassandra Clare does this really awesome thing where we have an ensemble of characters and we see the point of views of every single character, not just our two main characters. And when there is like a big climactic or battle scene and multiple characters are in different places, there'll be a page in one character's perspective, and that will end on a cliffhanger, and then it will go to like a page and a half of a different location with another group of characters. That will end on a cliffhanger, and then go to a third place and then go back to the first place, and then that will end up cliffhanger again, and it just keeps your eyes glued to the page. It is so effective. This is a big book, and I'm pretty sure I read over half of this book in one day. This book also contains one of my favorite book quotes ever. Fiction is truth even if it is not fact. If you believe only in facts and forget stories, your brain will live but your heart will die. I love that quote. Thank you, Arthur Blackthorne, for saying it. Such a good trilogy, but this is my favorite. And my number one favorite book of 2021 is Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This book is just amazing. The third act alone makes this my favorite book of the year. Like, I think about the events of the third act of this book at least once a day. It is so phenomenal. She just wrote a perfect third act. Like, it is just mind-blowing. The world in this book is so fascinating. I love how different it is from other fantasy worlds. Like, in this book we have technology, and technology plays a huge part in the plot, which is so interesting, and it's very different from other fantasy worlds where we are usually just like in the Dark Ages. I also love the little hints that Sarah J. Maas has put in this book that connect it to other Sarah J. Maas worlds. I'm so interested to see how that will play out, and if she's actually going to interconnect the characters or if it's just an Easter egg and that's it. Either way, I will be happy. But my favorite aspect of this book by far is just the theme of friendship. This is is a best friends book. Like, it centers around the friendship of Bryce and Danica, and it is so beautiful. Sarah J Maas just makes us believe how much these two friends love each other in the first 20 pages of this book. It is so impressive. I also do love Bryce and Hunt. I am also so excited for everything that it has set up for the next books in this series. I have no idea how many books it's going to be. I hope there's a lot because this world is so great. I'm so excited to see where it's going to go. It ended in that kind of place where it was kind of self-contained, but when a first book in a series is self-contained, it kind of leads for a lot of different places that it can go, and I'm so excited to see what Sarah J Maas does with this series. So I'm so excited for the second book. I have it pre-ordered. It literally comes out next month. Cannot even contain my excitement. And I'm just going to mention one more time, the third act of this book is everything. It's official. Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood was my favorite book of 2021. So that was my favorite books of 2021 plus my honorable mentions. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have any books in common with me, with any of the books that I showed you today, also on your favorite books list, and just let me know what your favorite books of 2021 were, and I'll see you next time. Bye!